Good afternoon and welcome to our first of 5 webinar sessions. I'm Laurent and I will be your host today. Our first session will focus on the trend of cash piling up on current and savings accounts. We have all been witnessing this trend. It is not even a recent trend. It didn't start with the pandemic, not even with the financial crisis of 2008. But now that interest rates are at rock bottom levels, the trend even accelerates. And yet, a lot of banking clients seem not to hold any investment at all. A true paradox. Today, our two speakers will tackle this challenge. Frederick van Gysegem will point us at the tremendous opportunity for the investment industry and provide you with valuable insights. Frederick van Gysegem is principal at Roland, Berger, Brussels, and advises financial services firms on strategical questions. Over the last 5 years, he worked for main players across Europe, the Middle East, and the United States. He regularly works on topics such as value proposition redefinition, distribution strategy, cost effectiveness, and HR transformation. Before joining Roland Berger, Frederick was active as a researcher at Ghent University, where he has been teaching investment analysis, and as an asset manager. He obtained his PhD in financial economics in 2013 on the market microstructure of financial markets and holds a master's degree in banking and finance, as well as a master's degree in economics. After his session, we will take some time for Q&A. Don't hesitate to post your questions in the chat. Frederick will be pleased to answer them. Our next speaker, of course, will be Jurgen Vandenbroucke. He will inspire you with some actionable behavioral insights which will help you improve your conversion of savers into investors, especially in the context of digital investment processes. Jurgen Vandenbroucke has over 20 years of experience at various entities within the KBC Group. Formerly the head of innovation at KBC AM, Jurgen is now the founder and managing director of everyoneINVESTED, the KBC Asset Management Wealth Tech spinoff. Also, Jurgen regularly takes initiatives to contribute to a world where everyone is not only invested, but also better informed. Witness his 2 books on improving financial literacy. Jurgen holds a PhD in behavioral finance and has published numerous academic publications on the topic. He teaches financial engineering at the University of Antwerp and is a research associate at the renowned EDEC Risk Institute. After Jurgen's session, we will take some time for questions as well. Please, again, do not hesitate to post your questions in the chat. At some point, the speaker will also invite you to participate in an anonymous poll. And of course, we will show the results during the sessions. Let's check maybe the result of the first poll. Or it didn't, was it not presented? We just have the question now, and maybe we can even answer now while we're busy with it. First question is it strategically important for your organization to tackle the cash is piling up on the savings accounts? Yes, no. And you can press submit. And as soon as we have enough respondents, more checking if all the technology is working, we will proceed with the agenda. Well, indeed, we have some very high scores. Most of you agree that it is a challenge of strategic importance. And for those, well, I see some reluctant ones still hesitating, I'm sure our speakers of today will help convince them to tackle that issue as well. So without further ado, let me invite Frederick van Gysegem to take over my screen for the next 10 to 15 minutes.
Yes, I will do that. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Laurent. I hope you all see my screen right now.
We do.
Great. Very happy to be here today for this virtual gathering and for this very diverse audience. So topic today is indeed conversion of savings into investments. And basically, I want to look into three things together with you. First of all, I want to look, okay, what is happening today when it comes to savings behavior? So first point. Second point, okay, how big is the opportunity now that we have and that comes from this savings behavior that we see across Europe. And thirdly, I want to share with you some first insights on how banks can seize this opportunity. So that's a bit what I had in mind to share with you. And let's maybe start with the first question. So what is happening today? Maybe we can start with the long-term perspective. So if we look at EU level, and that's the red dotted line that you see on the slide, we see that the gross savings rate of households has been gradually decreasing over the last years, but it remains relatively at 13%, so it's 1% lower than 10 years ago. So it remains overall relatively stable. However, we see big differences between countries. So we see there countries like Germany and France, where savings rates remained relatively high, but we see other countries where there has been a severe shift. And my own country, Belgium, is a good example there, coming from a savings rate, a gross savings rate of more than 18%, to roughly the European average of 13% right now. So you see that the picture is scattered and that there are specific country evolutions that played a role. However, if we look now to what happened over the last few months, we see that as in many aspects that there was some change, that the playing field changed. So if we there look to the left-hand side, the gross savings rate of the household. So you see there, 2019 savings rate around 13% at EU level. We see that it increased over the last months to 25% in Q2, which is obviously the result of the COVID crisis that we are all facing right now. Figures of Q3, Q4 are not yet available, but there is nothing that makes us think that the figures will be very different and that we will have a drop in the savings rate in Q3, Q4. So gross savings rate increased. Of course, interesting to know then, interesting question immediately is, okay, why do we see this? And there on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the results of a survey that was taken. And where people were asked, okay, why are you increasing your savings or are you decreasing your spendings? And there, when listening to the people, we see that the constrained lifestyle that we've all been facing over the last months played a key role. So people basically cannot spend. They are faced with stringent containment, and that makes that they put the money aside. So it's not, I mean, for some people it's loss of income. There are a few, but the main reason is really this constrained lifestyle. So overall picture, people put, and you see it on the left-hand side, they put in the end almost twice as much on the side as before, and they do that because they cannot spend the money. Just a side note on the bottom, but you might appreciate that the situation is very different for some companies. And so there, many of them are confronted with severe income losses. We all know the impacted sectors like the airlines, the event sector, the leisure sector. So for them, of course, the situation is very different, creating also a sort of imbalance in a way between the households and the companies. So, okay, people are saving more. Next question is then, of course, okay, what do people do with this money that they save? And there, we looked into, okay, where do these savings flow into? And if we look there, and these are again figures at EU level, if we look to what flows into currencies and deposits on the one hand, at the left-hand side, or what flows into investment funds and shares, we see also there that in Q2, per capita at EU level, people were putting money in currency and deposits for roughly 1,600 euros annualized, while only 427 euros annualized in investment funds and shares. So we see that the majority of this money that is saved still ends up on current accounts, on deposits accounts, and that this obviously has a big impact on the bank balance sheet. So if we try to look how big this impact is and to see where it leads us to, well, yeah, this leads us to basically the verge of 5 trillion euros, which is the staggering amount that households currently hold in deposits with their bank. So it's figures from October 2020. Staggering amount, and especially if you also look to the evolution, we come from 3.3 trillion in 2016. So there, clearly, the amount on these accounts has been exploding over the last years. And it is a staggering amount for sure, but it's also a call for action. And why is it a call for action? We see three reasons for that. So first of all, there is definitely an opportunity there for the people themselves. We come back to that. But secondly, there is also an opportunity for the society as a whole. And thirdly, there is an opportunity for the banks. So there is really a triple win in this 5 trillion, almost 5 trillion, that can be realized and that can be levered by the different economic actors. First of all, if we look to the customers, so there, if we put a bit the different alternatives in comparison, the different alternatives that private individuals have, going from savings deposits that yield roughly 0.11% currently, next to state bonds, company bonds, international company bonds, shares in the past 50 years, BEL 20, which is the local stock index in Belgium, we see that the difference is really huge. We see that, for example, putting the money in company bonds or in shares brings roughly 6 to 7% per year, if you look to it over the longer term, while the savings deposits only yield 0.11% for the customer. So one could in that sense argue that the savings deposits, that they limit the wealth creation for the customers, and that in that sense they truly represent a missed opportunity. So that's from the perspective of the customers. But looking a bit broader, there is also an opportunity for society. So the money that we currently put, all of us could put on savings accounts, could be used to finance ambitious investment projects, ambitious investment projects of which the entire society can benefit. And you see here a few examples. We're looking then, pollution that needs to be solved, automation in the industry, CO2 emissions that need to be decreased, solar panels, infrastructure, the aging population that also requires specific investments, vaccines, it's a no-brainer, of course. So there are a lot of ambitious projects out of there that are looking for financing and where this money could be channeled through. And in that sense, it can help our societies to move forward. Important remark here is, of course, that the money that is put on savings accounts, we're not saying that banks do not do anything with that. That is also flows into the economy. But the big difference is that this money, banks are constrained in what they can do with this money. The risk that they can take is limited. There are ratios that need to be met. So in that sense, it is used, but it can clearly have a much bigger impact in society if it could flow into more risk-taking projects. So voila, so that's a triple win. So triple win that is there for the society, that is there for the customers, and that is also there for the banks. So there, we've been looking into the P&L contribution that conversion of savings into investments bring for banks, and we started there from looking into the different cost components and revenue components that come with savings deposits and that come with financial investments on the other hand. So what do we see there? We see that savings deposits right now, they cost money for banks. So there is there a cost that we estimate at minus 0.5% associated with, whereas financial investments typically come with a positive P&L contribution. We see that the difference we estimated between 1.5 and 4.5% difference between the two. That is of course very impactful. The difference is quite big, so it can be 1.5 or 4.5, so the difference can be 3 times as high, depending of course on the specific products that are used by the bank and also the construction that is made with the asset manager. But in any case, whether it's 1.5 or 4.5, it remains significant in all scenarios. So what does this now mean at an overall bank perspective? So we did an analysis on the potential return on equity impact that the conversion of savings might have. And here you see the main results of that. And there are basically 2 parameters that are important and that need to be managed in order to maximize the impact on bank profitability. And that's on the one hand, the conversion rate. So if we start to launch initiatives to convert savings into investments, that's of course a key parameter to control. And on the other hand, the margin delta, so the difference between the 1.5 and the 4.5%. So in function of those parameters, the impact on profitability can be highly significant. So it can be up to 1.6 percentage points increase in return on equity with a successful conversion of savings to investments strategy. So this is of course a very significant. So as a reminder, currently in Europe, return on equity, average return on equity for banks is around 5 to 6%. So you clearly see that here there is potentially a very big impact, out there. So the opportunity is clearly there, and of course, this immediately asks the question: okay, what can we do? And maybe we can start there with a small poll that normally should appear on your screen anytime to check a bit. Okay, what is happening in your respective financial institutions, in your respective banks, with regards to the conversion of savings to investments. So there are different options that you can choose from. For example, dedicated training of the account managers, targeted webinars for clients that have a lot of cash, cashback and package deals, financial planning, social and community investing, spare change investments, so the investment of spare money of transactions, robo-advisory, interaction with a dedicated chatbot or voice bot that is really checking with people and trying to convince them to put their money into investments. So those are all examples that we see out of there. It would of course be interesting to hear and to see from you what is currently popular at your respective institutions. So let's maybe look into the answers if everybody had the time to select. Okay, so we see that things are being done. Dedicated training of account managers being the most popular, together with cashback and package deals, so almost 40% there. But the more, let's say, innovative approaches like community investing, spare change investing, robo-advisory are there for roughly 1/5 of the institutions that we have here around the table today. So still a lot that we can do, and still, I mean, it's interesting because you've all clearly seen the triple win, especially also for the banks. So still the number of initiatives that are taken remain relatively limited, and there is of course a good reason for that, because it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. If you're based on the work that we do with banks across Europe, we see several hurdles on the way to a successful conversion of savings into investments. Typically, there are three big steps that need to be taken with the customer. So first of all, the customer needs to consider that investing is something for him, first phase. Second phase is taken through the discovery step, because of course, even if the customer starts to realize, okay, investing is something for me, he does not necessarily know what to invest in. The third step, even when they know what to invest in, we see that we still lose a lot of customers in the actual purchase because they do not know how to actually invest. So these are the three big steps that need to be followed, and we see under the way several hurdles. So there are 6 that you see here on the bottom of the slide, which are, for example, the perceived entry barrier, the risk perception that is high, complexity of the offer. The personal identification with the project is also sometimes an issue. The onboarding process, the fear of deciding. All of those are hurdles that we face as a bank, where we need to work on together with our customers in order to successfully convert those savings into investments. So I believe Jurgen will show us some concrete examples there on what can be used. But one perspective that I wanted to offer here is that it obviously, based on the experience that we have, takes more than a set of smart fixes to be successful with regards to conversion of savings into investments. And it is important there that beyond the smart fixes to keep the strategic perspective, because we do believe that this is truly a strategic topic for every bank in Europe. And the strategical perspective needs to strike the right balance between client segmentation. So the way you segment your clients will, of course, impact the way you will approach them with regards to conversion of saving into investment. So that's already a very clear strategical topic that needs to be put in the balance. Secondly, the value proposition design. So how do I want to create value for my client is of course a crucial question for a bank, and there are a lot of interdependencies here with what we want to do with regards to conversion of saving into investment. And thirdly, the channel service model. So how do I want to interact with my customer? Do I want to use physical channels, website, app, intermediaries, a platform, third parties? So this channel service model needs to be the right one, and needs to be used appropriately, of course, when launching yourself in a conversion of saving into investment strategy. So important to keep this in mind and to strike there the right balance. I hope that this gives you already a few ideas. In a way, it's also a bit a teaser for what's coming and what Jurgen will present, but also, more broadly to start a reflection on this organization. So I hope, you learned a bit more about what's happening today, how big the opportunity is, and you got some. Most of the things that are discussed today are in the publication that you see there on the left, recent publication that can be found on our website. But we do have also a lot of other publications that you can find there, and that might be interesting for you. So thanks, everyoneINVESTED, to present this, and to those.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederick. Do you hear us? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, Frederick, we just checking in the chat, and some questions were coming in. Maybe very briefly, Andrea from Washington asked us that she says that she couldn't see the answer the poll, but mentions that her bank is doing nothing to encourage money going to stocks. She was asking whether she thought correctly of that question, probably meaning a lot of banks, a lot of financial institutions are not doing this at all. Is it also something that you see on your side?
Definitely, definitely, and it's indeed. I think the triple win. The first step is to realize how big the opportunity is, and there you saw the results of the analysis that we made. The triple win is clearly there, but still, yeah, we are sometimes we are still surprised basically about the limited action that we see within banks. And again, it is not an easy topic. It's not easy to solve this. It requires to strike the right strategical balance, to come up with the right set of solutions, and that's in many cases the insight that is missing in many banks in order to start undertaking something concretely. Okay. So I can fully understand and subscribe to the question that was asked and to the observation. Yeah.
I see that there are two other questions also, but due to timing constraints, I will leave the floor to the next speaker. We will answer those questions maybe directly to the people that have answered those questions, and we will put them, of course, online as well later on. The next speaker will be Jurgen Vandenbroucke, who will be discussing just and give us some actionable insights on behavioral finance.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you and welcome also from my side. As said, the topic of my part of the presentation will be to tackle the challenge to get everyone invested all the time. And indeed, that is phrased deliberately as a challenge. And to make it even more difficult, that we will put it in a context where we only do that digitally. So really, without the human encouragement factor, which we all know from real life, is an important contributor to the conversion rate of putting savings into investments. But here we are really focusing on a digital context. So what is the question and that the challenge is, and well, how do we overcome this lack of human encouragement? And for that topic, we will borrow heavily from this person. It's Richard Taylor, a Nobel laureate from 2017, who helped pioneering the field of behavioral economics, and also to a very large extent contributed to make it more popular and more known in a wider audience, also in many areas of application. So today we will try to learn from Richard, so to speak, and use his techniques, his insights, to cast them in the context of personal finance, and deliberately then look for opportunities to enhance net sales and investments through digital channels. And one of the books that he wrote on that issue, on that topic, you might know, it's about nudging. And that's really what we will borrow from to compensate the lack of human encouragement. We will put nudges in the digital process in order to provoke a desired behavior, so to speak. Now, one of the main features and new elements that he brought to the table is to challenge the fact that from a classical point of view, it was assumed that what people do is reflecting their preferences. So what you see as an action from people is supposed to reflect what their preferences are. And that was very much challenged by the field of behavioral economics by pointing at things that you can do in presenting a situation, in wording a situation in such a way that it changes the behavior that is observed. And one classical example that we can start with today is the example of organ donation. Now, most likely every one of you has an opinion whether or not they want to be an organ donator, but apparently the fact that in a society people indeed donate their organs very much depends on how the society organizes the way to express your preferences. And a classical example there is indeed to say, look, we have two different types of countries. In one type of country, for example, on your driver's license, you can explicitly check the box that says, yes, I want to be an organ donator. While in type B countries, you have to explicitly check the box of not wanting to be an organ donator. So the default setting by society here is organized in a different way. And whether or not you want to be an organ donator should not influence, of course, the way society organizes this, but it does, of course. Because if you look across the many countries that have set this up, the percentage of people that donate their organs is obviously much higher in those countries where you have to opt out compared to the countries where you have to opt in. And that's, as I said, the classical example, but very relevant because, for example, in the Netherlands, this was a discussion, a public opinion, I think last year, where society decided to move from a country to a B country. So that was voted in the Senate to change, actually to contribute to more organ donation. Now, this is one particular example that we can actually immediately use in the context of personal finance, because in our situation, we want to make investment the default. We don't want to teach people a lesson, so to speak, about the virtues of investing. We would like to make investing the default option. For example, by linking it to everyday life. And one example there, one particular application was actually also mentioned in the poll of Frederick, is to link investments to consumption. For example, by rounding the digital payments of people and make the rounded amounts, the roundings, contribute to, for example, a regular investment plan. That's something that we have seen across the globe in Acorns, for example, in the States. There are also some examples in Europe, and also from Everyone Invested, we support that kind of service to the benefit of expanding your investor base through digital channels. So that was the first nudge we wanted to highlight. Now, there are much more advanced things actually even above that. And for that, we will turn to a second inspiration of Everyone Invested and behavioral economics, which is Daniel Kahneman. Again, a Nobel laureate already in 2002. And the example we would like to borrow from him is the example where he showed that the way you phrase and the way you present a situation very much impacts the actual choices that people made. And the example I'm about to share with you is actually already dating from 1981, when he published it together with his co-author in Science magazine. But again, this one is very relevant these days, because if you would like to Google it, you can find it by searching on the Asian disease problem. So no joke there. So the situation that Kahneman described was, let's imagine that society is threatened by a global pandemic. And the fear is, the possible impact is that it might kill up to 60 million people. That was the setting. And then he proposed a vaccine or a research program trying to limit the number of casualties. And there were actually two programs presented, an A and a B program. Now, the A program says, if we do this, then of those 60 million threatened casualties, 20 million of them will be saved. While if we choose for program B, then there's a 1/3 probability that 60 million people will be saved, so all of them, or there's a 2/3 probability that nobody will be saved. Now, if this choice was presented to the panel that they did this research with, then a vast majority of the participants went or chose option A. Now, in the second part of their research, they cast the same setting in a different way. So they presented it slightly differently by changing the reference point. And now they said, look, this threatening of the 60 million casualties stays the same. But now the first program, if we choose to do this one, still 40 million people will die. Whereas if we choose for program B, then there's a 1/3 probability that nobody will die. And with a 2/3 probability, 60 million people will die. Now, in this particular setting, with this wording, a vast majority of the people chose program B. But of course, a clever attendant will have seen that actually in both situations, A and B are exactly the same. It's only that in the representation, they are different. In the first choice set, it was all framed and phrased in the positioning of saving people, while in the second setting, it was all phrased in the wording referring to dies and casualties. So how then can we learn from this in the context of personal finance, trying to contribute to a world where digitally everybody invests? Well, a very specific example linked to today's topic is, how do you look at the savings account? As Laurent mentioned, indeed, the savings accounts yield record low levels of return of yield. But still, that same reality can be looked at from different ways. You could say, well, this small remuneration on my savings account is low, but nevertheless, it's a sure gain. In that case, you would look at it as not losing money. So it's on the safe side and it provokes saving behavior. Whereas if you look into it, taking into account purchasing power, then the same situation turns into a situation where you have a small but a certain loss. And in that particular case, then you would look at it as something that you want to remedy, and investing might become the preferred solution. So that's a general conclusion, really, a general message that we take from Daniel Kahneman, that also in real life, people take more effort to prevent a loss than to pursue a gain. I guess also in your personal life, there are certainly occasions where this would uphold, that you take more effort to prevent a loss compared to pursuing a gain. So in general, if a problem is framed in terms of gains, it triggers risk-averse behavior, while if you frame it in terms of losses, it triggers a risk-tolerant behavior. The savings account is an obvious example to illustrate, but again, in the context of investing, there are quite others to be that you can think of as well. And then to build up to the third nudge of today, crucial in converting savings into investments, we also have to do some introspection, I guess. Because there, in real life, we must admit that poor conversion of savings into investments to some extent also is encouraged by the way the financial industry is looking at this. We have insisted, let's say, or encouraged people to have old habits, as it is called here. And with that, I refer to, again, the illustration where taking a different reference point might trigger different behavior. Now, to make very specific what I mean about that is, let's consider a client that we encourage to start saving, because in many countries, investments is only part of the picture as soon as the savings buffer exceeds a certain threshold. So as long as the client is below that threshold in terms of savings, we encourage him to save more so that he can reach that threshold, so that he becomes, let's say, a prospect for our investment proposition. But as soon as we get to that level, clients are perhaps that used to saving money that ultimately we exceed the threshold up to the extent that, well, really this client is ticking all the boxes, and our AI models on lead management say this should be a client that you should talk about investing. Now, in many cases, I guess, financial industry is perhaps too greedy and is looking at all the excess above of this threshold as a potential investment amount. And if you do that, then the client looks at it as being the reference point, namely his current balance on the savings account, and everything that is invested is potentially going to lower that amount, because indeed investments are subject to potential losses, and clients really, with this framework, with this reference point, focus very much on what they can lose of their current balance. The reference point is crucially different if you point the client to the amount that, for example, over the last 10 years, his balance did never go below. Because if you use that as the reference point in your communication towards the client, then he will look at it differently. He will look at it as being more ambitious in terms of upside potential, because if you look on a time, for example, 10-year horizon, and you make a projection into the future, you can definitely find an investment where the probability of a loss on a 10-year horizon is very, very low. So the reference point here really relates to the time framing and the time dimension that you enter into the picture. And ultimately, it boils down to nudge a client to look not at the current high level of his savings account, but rather look at, for example, a kind of iron inventory that he did never fall below in a long historic horizon. So that projecting that horizon in the future, he focuses on being more ambitious for the upside, because a diversified investment very likely on the same 10-year horizon is subject to very poor loss potential. So that in summary actually is the way Everyone Invested wants to contribute to a world where digitally also more savings goes into investments. We offer APIs that ultimately are all like these little elephants on this slide. You can add them, integrate them into your mobile banking app in order to digitally encourage people to start investing more in a way that we compensate for the lack of human encouragement. And to end my presentation, I would like to quote Desmond Tutu here to phrase it in a different way. Like I said, as the APIs are like little elephants, and the big elephant, there's only one way to eat it. It's one bite at a time. So all these things, as I said, can be integrated into your mobile banking app, starting to drain the savings accounts to the benefit of a wider investor base. I like to pass back the word now to Laurent to see if there were any questions or other remarks in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Jurgen. Actually, we had one question coming in the chat, and it was, can you give some examples of rounding investments if possible? And I think also a broader question probably, do we have some evidence about that, about it running to investments, if that works or not? So,
yeah, indeed, we do have experience with that. In the context of KBC, we have launched this service in a number of countries. So as an integration, an extra service in the existing mobile banking app of KBC. So it's not the intention that the clients have to download an additional application or whatever. So it's presented as an additional service in their existing trusted mobile banking app. And what we see in the context there where we launched it in Belgium and also in Czech Republic is that the number of clients that activate it is huge, is large. I mean, in Belgium, we now have over 70,000 users over a 2-year horizon. But more important, I think, is the qualitative results. We see there that in both countries that I referred to, over 50% of the users of this rounding service are new first-time investors. So it really ticks the box as being a service to digitally expand your investor base. And the second element there is that we see that their average age of these people that activate the service is well below the average age, let's say, of the conventional investor that visits a branch for investment advice. And then finally is also very promising what we call the halo effect. We see that quite some people that activate the service actually take own initiative, again, through digital channels, to buy additional investment products, either a pension savings scheme, or they contribute more to the investment plan than the roundings generate. So this halo effect is also something that we measure and that we see as very promising. So indeed, we have experience, and the qualitative results are very, very comparable. Maybe indeed, I would like also perhaps to seize the occasion to ask for a poll on the screen, because I have shown 3 nudges today and trying to digest them. And in order for you mentally perhaps to rank them, I would like to invite you to summarize which one you, in your particular situation, would judge as being most promising. Do you see more potential in the nudge 1, where you would link investing to consumption? Or do you say, well, in my marketing, I'm indeed trying to engage more investors by framing the savings account differently? And then thirdly, to recruit the many wealthy savers that don't have any investments yet, like Laurent mentioned in the beginning, you could say, well, I will put my money, let's say, on the nudge where I look at the current balance more in a historic perspective. So please, if I can invite you to rank these in terms of success estimate that you see on your side. Thank you. Okay. Voilà. Okay, so the framing of the savings account is deemed as most promising. Okay, and then the linking to consumption is third up, and the framing in the historic perspective is ranked as second. Okay, thanks very much for the feedback. And I pass the word now to Laurent to conclude today's webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This concludes, of course, our session of today. Recording will be made available later to the attendees, of course. Please, when leaving, give us your feedback. This will help us to improve for future sessions. And our next session tackles actually on January the 12th, the conversion killers while onboarding investment clients. If you want to attend, please do not forget to register through the Zoom links made available on LinkedIn. And once again, thanks for joining. Happy holidays and looking forward to see you on January 12th. Thank you very much.